You think no contact will make them forget you? Well, if your ex is an avoidant, here's the truth. They don't really believe you're gone. They secretly expect you to stay loyal, silent, and waiting just like you always did. Hi, I'm Jim Rohn, and in this video I'm exposing one of the biggest illusions avoidants carry when you go no contact, not to manipulate them, but to finally heal yourself. Because no matter how cold or indifferent they may act deep down, they still expect you to play your old role. They don't see your silence as an ending. They see it as a pause after which you'll show up again, just like before. They want you quiet but not detached. They want you distant but still emotionally accessible. And in this episode, I'll break down exactly what avoidants secretly expect during no contact, why self-respecting silence is the only thing that shakes them, and how to make sure you don't fall for the same emotional breadcrumbs when they come back half-hearted. If you've ever been stuck in an emotionally confusing relationship, this might be the wake-up call you need to finally walk away with dignity. So stay with me until the end, and if this message hits home, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because healing is powerful, but you were never meant to do it alone. Deep down, the avoidant holds a quiet expectation. You're not really going to leave. Even though they're the ones who pulled away, who went silent first, they still believe you'll remain emotionally tethered, energetically loyal. This is how they operate in relationships, not through clarity and connection, but through silent control. They want you quiet, but still emotionally present. Gone, but not gone. They expect you to keep holding emotional space for them, even without any contact. So when you go no contact, not as a tactic, but as a self-respecting choice, it collapses the foundation of control they've quietly relied on. They start to feel unsettled. Not because they suddenly realize they love you, but because they've lost the ability to regulate their own sense of power through your emotions. You used to be predictable. You'd text first, forgive quickly, wait patiently while they sorted things out. Now you're silent, but not the angry, resentful kind of silence. You're silent with clarity. And for the avoidant, that's dangerous, because it means something fundamental has shifted. You're not playing anymore. So what do? They check in. Not directly, rarely with accountability, but through little probes, watching your stories without saying a word, sending a vague, "How are you?" dropping a heart on an old post. This isn't connection, this is a test, a way to see if the door is still cracked open. They're not coming back to take responsibility, they're just checking, are you still there? And if you respond too quickly, if you fall back into the familiar dance, they'll retreat again, you'll shrink again. You'll find yourself back in the loop of maybe I'm just not enough. That's why your silence only holds power when it's rooted in self-respect. You're not just not texting first. You're no longer waiting for a message. You're not pretending to be strong. You've actually chosen peace regardless of whether they notice or not. And in that choice, you become someone new. Not the quiet rescuer, not the emotional fixer, not the one who waits to be chosen. You become the version of yourself you've always needed. The one who knows when enough is enough. The one who doesn't need a reply to feel worthy. The one who no longer uses love to prove their value. When the avoidant senses you're no longer reacting, they don't just feel loss. They feel disoriented. Because for the first time, you're not doing what they expected. And it's in that moment, if change is ever going to happen, it begins. Not because you pushed for it, but because you stepped off the emotional roller coaster they were used to driving. Here's a truth most don't admit. Avoidants aren't afraid of losing you instantly. What terrifies them more is you slowly fading out of their emotional grip. So even when they're the one who pulled away, they still quietly monitor, still hold the energetic cord, still expect that you're not really gone. You go silent, but they don't see it as the end. To them, it's just a pause. A temporary break they believe you're also participating in, not initiating contact but still watching, not saying I love you but still feeling something. In their mind, that's safety, you're still there in their orbit. They won't say this out loud, but their behavior shows it. They watch your stories, they keep old photos, they replay the playlist that reminds them of you. Not because they're ready to come back, but because they need to believe they still matter to you even in silence. But what they don't see coming is that this silence is different. This time, you're not quiet to be missed. You're not withholding to provoke a reaction. You're silent because you're reclaiming yourself. You're not just stepping back, you're stepping out. You're not playing the emotional chess game anymore. And that for someone used to control through distance feels destabilizing. In the past, they knew how to pull your strings. They knew when to disappear and when to breadcrumb. They operated by never fully committing but never fully letting go. And you, in the name of love, accepted the crumbs, hoping if you stayed long enough they'd finally offer the whole meal. But now you see it differently. Patience isn't waiting to be hurt long enough for someone to change. True patience is having the courage to walk away when something no longer nourishes your soul. You're not bitter, you're not dramatic, you're clear, you've woken up from the cycle. And in that awakening, something shifts in them. Because now you're not frozen in waiting energy. You're not hoping, you're not checking your phone, you're not building your day around the next maybe. You're healing, you're remembering who you are. And that unhooks them from the control they didn't realize they depended on. Suddenly, your absence is no longer passive, it's powerful, and they feel it. They don't see no contact as a true ending. They view it as a temporary pause. Why? Because they're wired to avoid emotional intimacy and responsibility while still maintaining a connection they can control. Avoidants fear intimacy, but they never truly want to lose connection. They pull away when emotions get too close, yet reappear the moment you begin to let go. This isn't love. This is a pattern of emotional control. They don't want to fully show up in the relationship because real closeness feels threatening to their inner emotional wounds. But they also can't bear the idea of you being completely gone because that means losing the emotional tether they secretly relied on to soothe their own emptiness. So they maintain the connection in ways they can control. Vague check-in texts. A random like on your post. An unexpected reappearance that feels accidental but isn't. But never with commitment. Never with emotional responsibility. Never in a way that moves toward you with clarity. This leaves you in constant confusion. Do they still care? Is this a sign we're meant to try again? Maybe if I just stay patient a little longer. You start placing yourself in the role of proving you're worthy enough for their return. And that's the trap. Because the more you reach, the safer they feel. Doing nothing. The more you love them from your wounds, the less they feel the need to grow. The only way out of this pattern is not to wait for them to change, but to change your own response. Instead of chasing, you stay grounded. Instead of explaining, you hold your silence. Instead of needing their validation, you give that to yourself. In that moment, you take back your power, not with anger, not with ultimatums, but by no longer playing the emotional game they use to keep you attached. But even then, they don't go away completely. They start watching you quietly, subtly. They keep an eye on your social media, drop vague messages, or pop back up just enough to make sure you haven't really let go. After you stop, no more texts, no more explanations, no more orbiting around them, they don't disappear. On the contrary, they begin to watch you from a distance. You might notice, they view your stories first. They like your posts, but don't message. They send a vague text like, "Thought of you today?" Or they accidentally react to something of yours. But stay clear, this isn't connection. This is surveillance. A quiet test to see, are you still there emotionally? They're not ready to face real emotions. They're not prepared for intimacy, but they also can't bear the idea that you've truly let go. Because if you genuinely walk away, they're left to face the one thing they fear most, the emptiness inside themselves. To the avoidant, you were never just a partner. You were a mirror. When you loved them, they felt worthy. When you waited, they felt chosen. When you hurt, they felt powerful. So if your silence comes without pain, if you disappear without blame, if you let go without needing them to return, they lose emotional control. They'll start poking, hoping to extract a reaction, a cryptic story, a sad quote, a signal that you're still emotionally circling around them. Because if you don't react, if you've truly shifted your energy inward, their old power dynamic collapses. And this is where you must stay grounded. Because this is the most emotionally vulnerable phase for anxious types. They see the avoidant reappear and their hope reignites. They think they're changing. Maybe this time will be different. But most of the time, these gestures aren't rooted in genuine change. They're rooted in the fear of losing emotional control. And if you return too quickly, you're pulled right back into the old loop, the unclear relationship, the emotional imbalance. You doing all the emotional labor, them appearing and disappearing on cue. The key here is this: do not let their distant attention dictate your emotional response. If they're truly ready for change, they will come forward with clarity. But if they're just dropping breadcrumbs from afar, you owe them nothing in return. They don't want you to disappear completely, but they're not ready to truly come back either. What they really want is your emotional breadcrumbs, the little signs that you still care. A cryptic Instagram story, a wistful post, a caption that hints, "She still thinks about me." And that's all they need, just enough to keep you emotionally tethered, but not enough to take accountability. They want you close, but not too close. They want to feel loved without having to love back in a mature, grounded way. This is the hallmark push-pull pattern of the avoidant. When you pull away, they pull you back. When you move closer, they push you away again. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because real intimacy makes them feel like they're losing control. In their inner world, love is a double-edged sword. It's both alluring and threatening. They crave connection but fear they're unworthy of it. And each time you continue to love them despite the distance and the pain, it doesn't reassure them. It reinforces their fear, "I'm not truly lovable, and she hasn't realized it yet." That's why, as long as you're still reacting even subtly, they feel safe inside the old emotional system. They don't need to change. You're still there, you still hurt for them, and they still get to manage the proximity of the connection on their terms. But when you stop scattering breadcrumbs, when your actions no longer revolve around what if they're watching, when you begin living your life without needing them as your audience, they begin to stumble. They'll test you again. A casual check-in text, a random heart reaction, a song from your shared past sent by accident. But you don't respond. Not because you want to punish them, but because you've finally seen the truth. Love cannot be built from scraps. You want real connection, not scattered appearances. You want full presence, not keep me around until I'm ready. And you know that every time you react to one of those vague signals, you're not just showing them you're still there, you're also denying yourself the chance to heal. At that moment, your silence is no longer a strategy. It becomes a declaration of self-respect. Not to make them regret anything, but to ensure that you no longer regret loving someone who never had the courage to love you back fully. What the avoidant never anticipated was that you would actually change during the no-contact period. They were used to the version of you that always reacted, always replying when they dropped a signal, always holding on to hope they'd come back, always prioritizing their emotions over your own self-worth. But this time you're no longer playing by their rules, you're not rushing to respond, you're not posting vague quotes, you're not needing breadcrumbs to feel enough. You began to grow quietly. You started stitching up the emotional wounds on your own. You stopped seeking closure from the person who broke you. And instead you created it yourself by drawing boundaries that didn't need permission. And that's exactly what caused the dynamic to shift. Not because you outplayed them, but because you withdrew your energy from the push-pull pattern they used to control the connection. You stepped out of the emotional cage they'd built with silence, vagueness, and calculated distance. And when you no longer needed them, no longer bent yourself to fit into the limited space they offered, They were left alone with the very defense mechanisms they'd used to protect themselves. This is the point where only two outcomes remain. Either they face themselves and do the real inner work to change, or they withdraw completely because the old system no longer works. But either way, something fundamental has already shifted within you. You've changed your emotional operating system. You no longer need a beautiful ending to heal. You need consistency, emotional maturity, and safety. And you're not begging for it, you're choosing it. In the end, here's what you must remember. Real love never requires you to sacrifice your self-respect. No one is worth shrinking yourself, going silent just to be accepted, or abandoning who you are to maintain an unclear connection. The avoidant may have made you feel like you were too much. But the truth is, you simply loved too deeply for someone who wasn't healed enough to receive it. You don't need to pretend you don't care to become attractive. You don't need to play games to win someone back. What you need is to stay honest with your heart and brave enough to hold the standards you once lowered for love. If they regret losing you, it won't be because you went silent. It'll be because you no longer belong to a place they could control. Be proud of that. You're not cold, you're not cruel, you're healing. And sometimes the bravest step is the one where you walk away and never look back.